Now that we've looked at the types of colonies that there are, we're going to look at each region in particular. We're going to see that there are some similarities, but more than likely we're going to see a lot of differences between these. So we're going to start with the New England colonies. Again, you'll have to notice where they're at on the map so that you can identify them with their colonial region on the test. Quite a few more vocab terms or key terms for this section: persecute, Puritan, Pilgrim, the Mayflower Compact, and subsistence farming. So in the New England colonies, there was a high demand for religious freedom. In England, the king had established the Protestant Anglican Church as the official church, and many people disagreed with establishing an official church, and we'll see that come into play when we write the Bill of Rights. But the church was very corrupt and very greedy. The rich were able to save money and provide money to the church, and because they were able to do that, the rich were able to be saved by God and go to heaven according to the church theories. And the rich felt as though they were able to behave however they wanted to because they had enough money literally to write a check to go to heaven. The poor, on the other hand, were told that they could not be saved, period. They didn't have any ability to pay the fines, the charges that it would take to go to heaven. So this was somewhat upsetting to the poor. In addition, the high clergy were dressed in expensive attire and they lived in huge churches, while the people outside, those poor that were never going to go to heaven, were starving to death. The people grew very upset with the church, and they didn't have any way to challenge the church, because all other religions and those who spoke out against the church were persecuted. Key term: to be treated harshly. Those that spoke out against the church could be beaten. They could be exiled, which is being forced to leave the country. Or they could even be sentenced to death if they refused to convert to the Anglican Church. But two distinct groups formed. The Puritans, which is a key term, they wanted to purify or reform the church. And the Separatists, which I know it's in purple, so that means it should be a key term, but it wasn't on the list. I'll get there on the next slide. The Separatists wanted to separate completely from the church and establish their own religion. But both of these groups were persecuted and were forced to leave England. Now, as I said, we were going to come back to separatists. Separatists, we don't know them as separatists. Instead, we know them as the Pilgrims. These are the people that made arrangements with the Virginia Company to come to North America. They actually began by going into the Netherlands, which was relatively close to England at the time, but they couldn't find jobs. And they wanted to teach their children to be English, not to be Danish. So they made a decision and an agreement with the Virginia Company to come to North America. The Separatists planned on going to Virginia, as that's who they made their agreement with, but without GPS, they ended up in Cape Cod, Massachusetts. The first winter, nearly half of the Pilgrims died. It was a tough winter again, and being unconditioned to the difficulty of living in a place with no housing, no real organized shelter, just what they had built, it was very difficult on them. But in the spring, two Native Americans, Squanto and Samoset, befriended the colonists, helped the Pilgrims learn how to grow crops and hunt and fish, and the Pilgrims would go on to make a treaty with the Wampanoag tribe in ensuring that they would survive. Now, while they were traveling, the Pilgrims, before they stepped off into Cape Cod, Plymouth, they actually wrote the Mayflower Compact. Key term. It's the first government written in North America and it was established to provide order. We are going to do an analysis of the Mayflower Compact and what exactly that means. So you're going to be more familiar with the Mayflower Compact. Now we want to talk specifically about each of the colonies within the New England region. And we're going to start with Massachusetts. It was created by Puritans, but it was actually a royal colony. Now how all that works, I'm not certain, but they did get permission from the king to come over here and establish a colony. They elected a group of officials that ran the colony, and in order to vote, you had to be an adult male landowner, in which you voted for the governor of the colony and the representatives. Now, they held to the belief that you needed to have an interest in what the government was doing before you could vote. So that's why they kept it to landowners. They wanted to make certain landowners are the ones that pay the taxes, and the taxation in particular is what the colonial government was going to deal with, spending and taxing. So they wanted the people to have a say, only the people that would be providing money to the government. Most of the settlers in Massachusetts would live in the town of Boston, which we're going to talk about again when it comes to the Revolutionary War. The next colony is Connecticut. As you can see on the map, it's south of Massachusetts. And being slightly south, the soil was actually a little bit better for farming than in Massachusetts. Connecticut is best known for adopting the first written constitution in America, which was called the Fundamental Orders of Connecticut. Now, the Mayflower Compact was an agreement that they would form a government and that they would listen to that government. They agreed to give power to it. But this in Connecticut is the first actual plan for the government, what it is going to do. So it's the first constitution in America. Rhode Island, teeny tiny little colony of Rhode Island, was a royal charter in 1644, and it was actually created by colonists who were forced to leave Massachusetts because they didn't believe in the Puritan religion, which I always find interesting, that the Puritans settled in Massachusetts because they weren't allowed to practice their religion in England, and then they kicked people out for not wanting to believe their religion. A little interesting to me, but Rhode Island's provided for religious freedom because those who came and settled in Rhode Island had been treated very harshly by those in Massachusetts and elsewhere because of their religion. Now, the economic activities within the colonies, the New England colonies, were very similar. First of all, there were many small farms. The soil and the growing season, the climate, just did not provide for large plantations like we would see in the South. Most instead had to practice subsistence farming, key term. Subsistence farming means that the family produces just enough to survive, and there's very little to sell or trade. They get by on what they produce. And because of this, the farmers relied on their families for labor. They didn't have indentured servants. They didn't have slaves because that's extra mouths to feed, which means more food to grow. So many of these farms are actually very small so that they don't have to provide more food. Many in the towns, there were small businesses, and because of the New England's natural resources, numerous streams, they were able to use water power to run mills, which is all very industrialized. Women were able to help support their families by producing cloth garments and candles and soap for additional income to purchase those things that they couldn't make themselves. Windows, for instance. You can't make a window by yourself. So that's something that you would need to purchase the glass for a window. Women helped to support their husbands in that way and the family. Large towns had skilled craftsmen, and because of its location, the New England colonies and their location along the water a lot of industries related to water were very important. Shipbuilding, we have lumber, fishing. These were all very important industries in the New England colonies. And very diversified economy. You have a little bit of farming, you have craftsmen, you have shipbuilding, you have fishing. Very diverse economy for the time period, which would be very important as we get closer to the Civil War. After discussing all of this information about the New England colonies, it's time to take quiz 1.1. Just come and see me and I'll give it to you. Thank you.